Howdy guys! Today we are going to be embarking on what I hope is not an epic journey. I hope it goes pretty smooth. We have a 2009 Volvo S60 2.5T that has a PCV system that needs to be replaced. If you do the old glove test with a rubber glove, where you take the oil cap off and put this on the oil cap, it should try to suck it in somewhat. This tries to blow it back out. It doesn't inflate it, just blows it back out, so you know it's getting to that point where it needs to be replaced. These Volvos don't use the old style PCV valve that mounts somewhere up on top of the valve cover or something like that that costs 20 bucks and takes 5 minutes to replace. That would be awfully nice if it did, but this isn't one of those. They use what's called an oil trap. I've heard them called flame traps too, but I think oil trap is probably the best way to describe it. It's mounted under the intake manifold, which means we've got to remove a few parts. Let me take you off the tripod. I'll give you a little bit of a rundown of what we've got to do here today. All right, we've got a couple of things in the way. First, we've got to get this off. It's just in the way. It's not horrible, but it's real easy to get off, so let's get it out of the way. And it's just a bolt on either end, or I could remove with those nuts there. Either way, whichever works best for you. Then I've got to take the boost tube off that goes from the turbocharger outlet up to here. Where is it? Or something like that. Maybe that's fresh air intake. I don't know. We've got to take that off. We've got to take these covers off here. We've got to take our fuel rail off. This is our fuel rail, and while I'm doing that, I'm going to be replacing the fuel injectors in here because they're really cheap to replace. You can get those refurbished for next to nothing. Disconnect this. There's a little twist tie that holds that in place there. Use your Schrader valve to drain or release the pressure on your fuel rail. I got to take the oil dipstick out because it's in the way. Underneath the intake manifold, there's a banjo bolt right about here that you've got to remove as well. And then you can release the intake manifold and kind of move that off out of the way. First thing it's got to come out is this. It's also in the way. So we'll get to that when I've got two hands. But let me show you what we're going to be putting in here. Alrighty, this is the kit that I have to put in today. This is from IPD Volvo, which I think is IPDUSA.com. This kit comes complete with everything you need to do the job. And I did add in a couple of things. I got some super lube here. It's a synthetic lubricant, silicone-based, that will, just to lube up the O-rings and things as I put stuff back in. It makes things slide on easier. It has the factory Volvo oil trap. This is an oil trap on this thing. It's a big sucker. Has all the couplings and connectors. And you'll notice that Volvo has those crimp style connectors that you have to have special pliers for. The kit that you get has regular, whatever these are called, radiator clamp style connectors is all I ever referred to them as, where you can just use a screwdriver to tighten them back on. I've got my intake manifold gasket. This is a tube that goes from here up to, this sets up on top of the engine up under that cover. This goes right next to your oil cap. Got my set of refurbished, I think those are Bosch branded or OE Volvo branded. I can't remember which ones I ended up getting. Fuel injectors. And this right here, this is what's nice about the IPD Volvo kit. This piece right here needs to be replaced. This has a little tube that runs up and plugs in right down there. This is not sold for the T5. You can get this piece for the T6 and kind of cut this open. IPD Volvo actually has a video on how to do that. and replace this. And the one for the T6 is just a little bit longer, so it bumps out a little bit, but that's fine. It really doesn't matter. This is an aftermarket branded, which is just some rubber hoses and stuff like that, with the little fittings. It's included with a kit, and I got this entire kit minus, of course, these things here, from IPD Volvo on a Black Friday sale for 215 bucks. Normally they're like 250 or something, which is not bad. The OE Volvo does not include this, and it's more expensive without this. This alone is like $100 and something if you want to replace that whole coolant tube. So it's a very comprehensive kit. So let's go back outside, get our tools, and start getting ready. All right, first things first, let's get this removed. Both of these on mine were 18 millimeter. So let's get those taken off. Pull that out, set that aside, and I'm going to take these off. Let me find my socket and see what size those are. All right, on mine these are 13 millimeter, and I'm going to need an extension for that because it sticks up a little bit there. So we'll get these off, and if you want to know where to put these when you're done, the best place is to just put them right back in there. I'm going to get these loosened up, and then we'll take this off and set it off to the side. All right, we have to remove this screw here, and there's one in the front here holding this charge pipe in place. That's T25. So I already got this started right here. I'm going to get that the rest of the way out. Careful not to drop it. You don't want to lose track of your screws. Either set them aside somewhere and label them, or put them right back in the holes where you got them. Whatever works for you. See, I can take this, put it right back in the hole there, and then I know I'm not going to lose track of it for when I need it next. Next, I've got a little wire here on a clip. Let me get you guys over here just a second. Hang on. There's a wire here that fits into this clip. You just take it off, and you're going to see back here, you've got this top clamp that you've got to loosen, just the top one, so that you can pop this tube up. And down here, you're going to have to get to it from over here probably. There's another screw. You see it down there. Oh, actually it's on this side, so I'm going to have to get to it from this side to pop that loose. I've also got to get this sucker out of here still. And that just pops in. But hang on, let me get it out. Alrighty, for this, it just slides in here, and you just pull and see it just kind of fits up in the breather box there. Set this off to the side, and then I'm going to loosen this clamp and this clamp back here, and then we'll pop this tube off. Alright, in order to get to that bolt down there, what I think I'm going to do is go ahead and take my oil dipstick tube out. I've got to take it out anyway. That is an 8 millimeter, and then it has a it just pushes into the block down below, has an oil seal, a ring. That seal might be hard to pop out, so you just gotta, get your hands down there and pull hard to pop it out. So let me get that taken care of real quick. Okay, there's this screw for the oil dipstick. Let's see how easy that is going to be to get out. Yeah, it is a royal pain to get that out, isn't it? So we're going to work at that and Just get your hands down. There's not a lot of room to work with, but you know, actually I think with that kind of pushed out of the way, I can get down in there now. So I'll go ahead and get this off first and then come back to that. All right, this dipstick tube is a royal pain to get out. It does not want to come out. So I've got some lube down in where this hole goes in, where it goes into the hole. We're going to move on to other things right now. Let's go ahead and get this twist tie thing off of here. What is? There we go. Just got to cut it off and take that old twist tie. However, that thing is in there. It. Something falling down somewhere. There we go. Just take this clip out and get the pieces of that twist tie out. Which, that way I can put a new twist tie in when we're done. There we go. Okay, and let's unclip this here. Let's see, how does that clip work? Oh, just push and pull, I do believe. Yep, push it. I may need a small screwdriver to pry up on the other end of that. We'll see. But I'm going to pull that off and we'll get right back to you. All right, some of these you got to realize these things haven't been removed in a long time, so pinching them can be a little hard. There's a tab that it lifts up. Sometimes you just got to help it out with a screwdriver, and there it just pops right off, and we'll just move that off to the side there. Next, we're going to remove these covers here, all these bolts for this cover, and that is a T30. And if you've got a little small impact drill like this, it really does come in handy pulling these out. It makes the job go a lot quicker. Because this is going to be a time-consuming job, no matter how you look at it. We've just got started, and we still have a lot left to go. And the hard part is yet to come. Okay, there's that cover. There's this cover. This cover has a little tab right here, release that, and that lets you also take a look at your timing belt, which mine was changed recently, so I know it's in good shape. This tube right here is going to be replaced. Next thing we need to do is take our clips off for our fuel injectors, and there are little wires here. Let me bring you in a little closer so you can see. You just push this wire down and it pulls right off. And we'll have to get this out right here as well. I got to get down to that. I can't do it one-handed. And we'll just set this wire loom off to the side. We're getting there, guys. Wire loom out of the way. On your fuel rail right here, there's a little Schrader valve here that has a little cap that looks like something that goes on the valve stem of your car. Remove that. Take you a paper towel and a small screwdriver, set it down in there, and just push it to release that fuel pressure. And there's not a whole lot of pressure. I mean, you saw just a tiny bit squirt out there, but you know, you don't want it squirting up in your eye. So that's all we needed to do there. And I can put my cap back in place so I don't lose that. And we're going to move on to removing this. First thing I want to do is remove this, which I think is an 8mm, which I think yep, that is 8mm. So I'm going to remove that. And this. You notice those are small. I mean, not on there tight. I just got a tiny little wrench here I'm using. Just needs to hold it in. It doesn't need to torque it down. Now, right here, I've got to remove this T20, I think it is, and then press a clip there and pull that off, and that releases my fuel line from the fuel rail. Let me get my Torx bit and we'll come right back. Alright, that's not a T20 after all on mine, it's a T15, so. Tiny little thing. Okay, got that. Want to hold on to that as you're taking it off because it's not uncommon for it to drop down in there. And lovely plastic broke off of this, which this just sits down on there and clips that in place. So I'm probably going to have to order another one of these plastic parts. That's the bad thing about these old plastic parts. See, it just broke right off there. Sometimes that's going to happen. I mean, this plastic part just keeps this from popping out. So it's not the end of the world, but you know, I really don't want my fuel line leaking there. But once we've done that, we should be able to pull, and I might need to use a large screwdriver here to help get this started as a pry bar to pry these off. And there is my fuel injector rail. Check it out. Now, one thing you're going to want to check is to make sure these seals that are on each one of these is on the fuel injector, not in the intake manifold. If they are, you got to get it out of the intake manifold. There is fuel in this line, so you're going to have to drain it out, and you can drain it out through that right there. So have your little bucket or can or something ready to do that. I'm going to take my gas can for my lawnmower, which is on the side of the garage over here. Just pour it right into that. All right, I have the gas drained out of this. Now, if you're going to replace your fuel injectors like I am, at this point, you'll notice on the rail, there's a screw there and a screw there. If I undo that, this whole thing slides out, and that locks into little grooves in my fuel injectors to keep them from sliding around. So all I've got to do is take, oh, actually there's three screws out, pop this keeper rail off, and then replace these. And I'm going to take this inside the house and set it aside, and I'll do that before I put this back on. All right, next this hose has got to come off. And you see these pinch clamps that Volvo uses? There's more than one manufacturer that uses those. Having a thin screwdriver, I don't know, this one mightn't even be thin enough. Yeah, I think it is. That you can get in there and kind of unpinch these is really helpful. That way I can move that out of the way. Actually, that's going to pull off really easy, which is nice. Sometimes that doesn't happen. But then I can remove that and get it out of the way. I hate these clamps. I mean, they work well, but I just don't have the pliers to clamp them back on. And you can't reuse them. If you've got to remove something, you can't reuse these. So I really don't like stuff that can't be reused. So next, we've got bolts here here and here that have to be completely removed for the intake manifold, and one there. Where's my flashlight? One there, and one up under this. I don't know if you can even see it down there. I don't even know if I can see it down there. But there's a bolt down there somewhere that you have to loosen, because these come out and then the whole intake just slides up and pulls off. So let's get started on that. That one down there is going to be the hardest one of all, and you're liable to need a wobble socket or something for that. So, and I think these are 10 millimeters, so let's get set up and get started on that. All right, I've got those bolts out, you can see. Those weren't too bad. I've got the ones there loosened. This one down here, if you look right between here, no, sorry, right between there. Man, and it's so bright. That's the only way to see. You see the bolt head right down there. That's where that sucker's at. So you kind of got to get to it through here, which is going to be a pain. We'll see what we can do. This is a one you've got to be patient for. And have these wobble sockets and extensions. I've got a couple of extensions here. I've got a longer one than I'm going to put on and see if I can get in there. But universal joints might work too, so we'll see what we can do. All right, still having troubles getting to that bolt back there. I think what I'm going to do is remove this tube here to the mass airflow sensor down below. I've got to remove it anyway. And if you look right there real carefully where the light is, there's one of those clamps, screw-on clamps. It's a 7 millimeter head. I can remove that and then just kind of put your weight and push down on that thing and it'll pop out of the way. So I think I'm going to get that moved out of the way a little bit first. Whew, I finally got that sucker off, and let me tell you, it was not easy. That is challenging. So this intake manifold is loose. I still have to get this off. I tried to take it off, but it won't pop loose. I've got to get this hose up out of the way, which if I still have a screwdriver here, I'll just pop that up. Let me get a bigger screwdriver. Pop that sucker right on out. It's going to be replaced, and you can feel it's hard. So I don't really care what the condition is when it comes out. I just want it out. Oh, it's got one of those clamps on. That's why it was so hard to get out. That's fine. We don't really care about it. And if I wanted to, I could cut that sucker too. But underneath, there's a banjo bolt here, and I still need to get this to release. So we're going to work on that. It's quite the process here, though. Just take your time little bit by little bit, and you'll get it. So we're going to keep going at it. Got my intake loose. Got some dirty ports there. We're going to have to look into that. I'm not sure what that's from. But underneath here is that banjo bolt right there. I got to get off. That's a 17 millimeter. There's a crush washer on each side of it, so be careful. So I'm going to go remove that now, and then my intake manifold, I should just be able to fold off to the side on that. So I'll be right back. All right, there is one more thing in the way of this intake manifold right there. This little wire clip just clips in place. It's just a push pin connector there on the side, and a little clamp that holds it in place right there. I'm going to get that out, and then while I've got my intake off, I'm going to pull my mass airflow sensor out and clean that as well. I've got a new gasket for that, so it's a good time to do that. So be right back when I get that out. Alrighty, got my throttle body cleaned up. Looks a lot better inside than it did. I have me a brand new gasket. I don't know who oh, it's a Felpro gasket they send too, so it's a nice thing. and I'm going to mount this back on, and I'll be done with that. And then I can move on to the rest of the stuff. All right, so there's a bunch of clips that you've got to get off. There's one right down there. That's where you got to get off with your screwdriver. Look over here, and there's this big bulky thing. It's got one there, but really there's one on the big bulky thing back in the back, if you can see it there. If we get that one out, then that would let us pull this forward. And we've got to get, I think that is it, except for the bolt right there. Oops, can't see it. And there's one down there too we've got to get to. That's going to need a wobble connector as well. Let's get those out first, and that gets the box out. So I'm going to work on that next. Alright, so for this bolt back here, you see I've got my, really hard to see the bolt itself, but I've got my socket on it. If you loop it up kind of straight in there, up under, I've got a wobble extension, another short extension on top of that, and then I can get my ratchet with another short extension in there. So you got to have a few extensions, you got to have a few tools here, but that one's actually not hard to get to. That little bastard right there is the hardest one to get to. Really don't like that bolt. I'm sure it doesn't like us either. This intake manifold gasket, by the way, has got to come off. And this, you can't remove this bolt that bottoms out against the thermostat housing right there. So you just cut it, and when you put the new one back on, you do the same thing. You just cut a notch right there so it goes right over the bolt. These two you can take out. Matter of fact, while I'm here, I'm going to go ahead and take these out. And then I'll get this off here just a little bit. Right now, I'm going to get that box off. I'm going to get that one bolt left. Alright, so here's the situation. In order to get this tube right here on, I've got to disconnect this end and this end. Now this end is easy. It's just right there. That little piece right there. Not a big deal. The other end comes back over here, connects down right there, that right in the center of the bright spot. That's easy. But the banjo bolt fitting is up under. See that little bolt sticking out right there behind that vertical support piece? This right here goes down to. That's the banjo bolt. So I got to take this off, and I think this is nothing more than the lift point for putting in the motor. There are 3 10mm bolts. I'm going to take those out and see what I've got. Before I start taking any of this stuff off though, because this is a coolant tube, I think I'm going to be losing some coolant when I do this. Because take a look, this is my hose coming off the radiator into there, off the bottom of the thermostat. So that's coming out of the thermostat. That's water going through here. So I need to drain some coolant out first. And underneath the front of this, there's a little shuttlecock or petcock that you have to release to drain that out. Which means I got to get it up on jacks. I can't get my little drain tub underneath there. So let me do that, and then we'll... Actually, I'm going to take off that support piece, and then we'll get the coolant drained out. Alright, here's where we're at. I had to remove this from here. Remember, that came off pretty easy. Back past here, I got that, where'd it go? The other end of this. Let me get my flashlight back down there. Oh, there it is. This is removed. Just had a bad angle. That's been removed. And right there, that banjo bolt if I can get myself in. See where the connection goes right there? Way up under there, you see where that little copper looking piece is? That's one of the crush washers still stuck to the engine. So now we got to pull out this whole coolant tube and try to fish the other one back in its place and put it back in. Start bolting things down. And here is why we have to replace this. Here's that banjo bolt fitting that was on the underside of the intake manifold. And there's supposed to be passageways in there. And if you can look, all you see is crud and gunk built up in there. So nothing can flow through. So this piece, this tube piece right here has to be replaced. And if I chop that off, if I were to cut this and look inside that tube's going to be clogged up way down into here. So that's why we got to replace at least this piece, but I'm just replacing the whole coolant tube. All right, if you can look down in there, I got my banjo bolt back on to that spot right there. And the one that the nut that they sent me in the kit, the banjo bolt, was 18 millimeter, not 19. I got that back on. Fishing this through was a lot harder than I thought it would be. And getting that banjo bolt started was a lot harder than I thought it would be. It is 5:30. I started about 12:30. So I've been at this quite a while. You know, granted, I've been making a video and just kind of taking my time at this. But this does go to show you, this is not a quick thing. There's a lot left to be done here before we can even start this sucker up. So next, I had to take out my breather box here. It was just in the way. So I'm going to put all that stuff back in real quick, just so it's there and done. And then I've got to hook up this end of the hose down there, and then I can start putting my breather box, my oil trap back in. Once my oil trap is in, then I can put my intake manifold in. And then I've got to go replace the fuel injectors on the fuel rail. So let me get my breather box back in and we'll come back at it. All right, before I put this in there, I pre-positioned a couple of things. I held this up against the old one and I positioned this piece and this piece, which is the tube that comes up on top of the engine there. So I've got to set, before I put this pipe in right there, I think I'm just going to put this in, because this is out of the way right there. I kind of like that out of the way, so I'm going to put this in. You know, I still never did get that oil dipstick tube out either. I don't know what the heck is the deal with that, but it just would not come out. I got the engine completely opened up here pretty much. And I still could not get that stupid dipstick tube out. I mean, it wiggles around like crazy, but it won't come out. So I might try again at that real quick, and then I'm just going to start mounting the breather box, the oil trap. Alrighty, I got that in there. One thing I did forget, I forgot to put my little clamp around the large piece there where it goes onto the block, so I've got to kind of peel that back, or try to peel that back and put that in there, because I don't really want to take the box back out. That bottom bolt is a pain to get back in. It's not too bad with the wobble joints. And to hold the bolt in place, what you do is you take a piece of paper towel, set it down over your socket, put your bolt in, and then tear the outside area away, and the paper towel takes up room in the socket and keeps the bolt in place. You can do that with paper too, but I find paper towel is a lot easier to work with. So let me get that clamp on that piece right there, and we'll be right back. Alrighty, I got my clamp around the big part there. Now I'm pushing this piece from this tube down onto the here, and I'm going to tighten that down. Until that's on there nice and snug. And that should be more than enough. And then I've got to put this over, whoops, I can't see, this over here. and then apologize for doing this one-handed, take this and I'm going to tighten that down, so I gotta hold that in place, so I'll be right back. Alright, this top one up here just pushes down into place, and you're going to want to take the number 3 coil pack off to get to it. And this just kind of lines up with my covers. You'll see when I put my covers back on, it just kind of lines up there, and that holds it in place. Nothing special. Okay, so what do we got left to do? Find out where this went. Oh, that goes on the bottom of the intake somewhere. I can't remember where. This has got to go onto the intake right there. That's that banjo bolt. But we're almost ready to get the intake back on. Let me take a quick look and see what we're missing here. Okay, we remembered where this went. It actually comes up over here and plugs up on top of the manifold. Threw me off for a second though. Okay, to get this off, all we got to do is get it to a spot where we can get some pliers on there. And I might need 2 hands. We're just going to snip that off though. Take some snips and snip a little slot on that. And then when we put the new gasket in, we're going to do the same thing. We're just going to cut a little slit for the bolt to go around the bolt. It doesn't cause any trouble. It doesn't harm anything at all. Some motors, you'll find the gaskets are designed like that, so it's not going to cause any trouble. So let me get that old gasket off and then make sure this surface is nice and clean to put the new one on. Okay, I need to make a little correction about something. I said this pressed on. I was wrong. It does have a clamp that holds it in. And I got my number 3 coil pack back on, so my coil packs are back on. I got my intake manifold gasket cut and in place, and my bottom bolts there, so I can just slide this on. Now I've got to flip this over and try to get that banjo bolt in there. It's really kind of easier if you have this tilted back like this, to kind of work your way up in there with it, because if you don't, then there's no room to work right there. There's absolutely zero room to put a socket or anything on there. You have to have like a little stubby ratchet wrench or something, and I don't have anything like that. So you can lay this back and put that on before you rotate it back into place. So I'm going to do that. All right, and this is one of those moments where you realize you got the order wrong. This is a fiddly job. You're going to have things like this happen. You just got to roll with them. This pipe runs up through here after you get the manifold on. So I can't put that in there. So I've got to take that right back off. You just got to laugh at those things. So this is going to happen to everybody at some point in time, so don't worry about it. So I'm going to take that off, and then we're going to do it the right way, hopefully. Alrighty, I got my intake manifold back on here now. I got this routed properly this time. I got this clamped back down. I had to actually take this off and put that little tube back on afterwards. I'm just going right now, tightening up my upper manifold bolts, and then I will get to the lower bolts, including that one sucker over there that's a pain in the butt to get to. So stay tuned. We'll have the intake manifold back on here in a little bit. And I think we've been going for 6 hours now at this. First time I've done this, I'm really taking my time with it, but like I said, this is not something that is quick to do. Alrighty, I've got my bolt right down there in the center, or a clamp tightened to put my intake line back on the throttle body. I've got my fuel rail here, my new fuel injectors on, and I have the O-rings lubed up. So this really is just a matter of setting this back up here and pushing it in. I'm going to mount you on the tripod and see if we can't do that real quick. Alrighty, and those of you might notice I had it upside down like that too. It goes like this. So really this is just a matter setting it up here, setting it on my fuel line. Oh, I got to get these out of the way. I got my screws that hold it in place in my way. Okay, now let's try this again. Fuel line. Wiggle that to seat them in there. You want to see those O-rings slide down inside the ports there for them. And then we'll get our bolts in place. Tightened down. I'm going to finish that and be right back. Alright, I have this mounted back up here. There's a retainer clip right there that the tab broke off, so I'm going to order a new one of those. Right now I want to put my wiring harness back up here and plug my fuel injectors back in. And that's just a matter of pushing these down on. Plug my sensor in over here. I think that may be a temperature sensor over there. And my fuel pressure sensor over here. So I've got the oil draining right now. I've got to button up the dipstick tube here, tighten that down. As soon as I can find what I did with a screw for it. Put my covers back on, put my boost tube back on, and then put my cross member back on. Put some oil back in and put my coolant back in, and then we'll be ready to start it up and see how it runs. Alright, now we are in the process of putting the engine covers all back on. Get these started, and this one of course goes right here. So I'll get all the bolts in for that. And I'm also filling my coolant back up. Put my coolant back in since I had to drain that because I replaced this coolant tube. Now one thing I did not show you guys, when we pulled the old breather box off, the PCV box, the passageways leading into the block, a lot of the time those are horribly clogged up and you have to scrape that out. Mine were not, so I did not have to bother with that. So I was lucky on that. A lot of the times you guys will have to scrape that stuff out, and it doesn't hurt to blow compressed air through the fittings to make sure it burbles back out through the top. If it does not, then you got to drop the oil pan because there's passageways blocked in there, and that's not good. So be right back. Alrighty, got my covers on. Now it's time to put my boost tube on. I'm going to put this end in first so I can tighten this clamp, and then I'll put the other end in down there, and then it's on to the cross member. This is just a matter of pushing these back in. It's real easy to do. Get to that one when I can see it, and I'll tighten this stuff down and we'll be right back. And that is replacing the PCV system on a 2009 Volvo S60. Of course, I did take a couple of extra steps. If you've got that throttle body accessible right there, I do recommend that you clean that. Mine was very dirty and needed cleaning. It is amazing how much crud builds up on where that butterfly plate meets up against the outside of the valve body itself, there's a lot of crud that builds up there. Just brake parts cleaner, and brass bristle brush is all I use to clean that. I did replace the fuel injectors. Was nervous at first because when I started it up, it had to clear the air out of the line for the fuel rail and relearn the everything real quickly. So for a couple of minutes there, it ran really rough. I kept revving it and making sure it stayed running, and then with a couple of minutes it settled down and it purrs like a kitten now. And when I take it out with those new fuel injectors that probably have a better spray pattern and accelerate, it feels so much nicer too. So took a few minutes to do those, but I think it was worth it. If you are not comfortable with spending a lot of fiddly time working on a car, I highly recommend you let somebody else do this. This was not an easy job. Most of it is just that there's limited space to work in. Everything is so fiddly. If you replace the coolant line with that banjo bolt on it on each end, like I did, fishing that through the back side of the engine there was a pain in the butt. It probably took me an hour just to do that and get that banjo bolt in place there. It was a nightmare. My mechanic wanted to charge me $600 to do this if I provided my own parts. And you know what, at this point, it took 8 hours to do all of this. I'm almost willing to have let them. But sometimes it's the experience of doing it. If you're younger especially, not a big deal. I'm getting older. I just don't really care to spend 8 hours working on a car sometimes. Unless it's an old classic maybe. It's something that you can do, but man, be prepared. It is not a 2-hour job. So anyway, I just got through taking it for a test drive. Runs beautifully. If you do replace that coolant line and you have to drain your coolant out, when you put your coolant back in, it's not going to want to all go back in. The engine has to get up to operating temperature and open all the passages before it will start pulling that coolant out of the tank, the rest of it. And you're going to want to take, what I did is poured the remaining coolant into an old Dasani bottle and took it with me, because once the engine warmed up a couple of minutes later, I got low coolant warning. So I just pulled over, poured the rest of it out of the Dasani bottle into my coolant tank. Good to go. That's it, guys. I hope you got something out of this. I think this is probably going to be a very long video too, and I apologize for that, but it was an even longer work day. Talk to you guys later.